Hi,
Who knew?
everybody. Uh, we missed the countdown, but thanks for turning in to Rules as Written or Raw. My name is Matt, also known as Grape Ape, and thanks for being with us tonight. Joined as always by my co-host,
Mm. Yep, Stefan, also known as DM Bad Wrong Fun.
Stefan. This is our second episode in the Mutant Crawl Classics, into the MCC rule book, and we've got a good guest tonight. Would you do the
Oh
honors?
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. He's got an almost perfect name. He is Stephen, not Stefan, but Stephen Newton. He was there from very early in Mutant Crawl Classics. He did the first MCC third party adventure, and now he's been doing a bunch of mainline adventures for MCC and also Dungeon Crawl Classics as well.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, and a lot of people mispronounce my name to Stefan, so we're brothers that way.
Yeah.
Well, Steve,
Seriously,
tell us a little
thank
bit
you.
more about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So, where do we start? So, I've been playing for a long time. I was in early in the Dungeon Crawl Classics. I think I was one of the first. I know I was one of the first. Me and John Marr were the first two third-party publishers for DCC. I was engaged early on with MCC, so I was fortunate enough to be able to have some correspondence with Jim Wampler when he was writing MCC. So I was able to get some really early looks at the rules. So that was a very fortunate opportunity. Written a few adventures, and I'm excited to be on the show.
And you've written for both DCC and MCC. I know this is like picking your favorite child, but is there one that you favor over the other?
I always favor the one I just finished. So whatever that one's going to be.
All right.
Seriously though, I do play a lot more DCC than MCC. I but I'm typically ever only playing either something that I'm playtesting or something one of the other judges needs playtesting. So that's what I'm typically doing.
Well, 2 weeks ago we had on Tim Snyder as a guest, and we asked our current guest the questions from last week. So the first question was: Is MCC, is Mutant Crawl Classics, compatible with Dungeon Crawl Classics? In your opinion, what do you think?
In my opinion, I would say it is with some minor tweaking. A lot of the classes are very similar. So a Sentinel is very close to a fighter type, but there are some differences. So, but could you bring a warrior into MCC? Absolutely.
All right, Stefan, you want to hit him up with the second question?
Oh, you do it. I don't have it ready. Is
All
work
right.
killing me today.
Sorry. Well, Stefan, you just got off a work meeting, so
Yeah.
you've got a little leeway there. Our second question is: Where does MCC take place? What setting is this where this mutant menagerie happens?
So it's interesting because I do have a little insider baseball on this one again from my background with Jim. So rules as written, as this show is, it's Terra AD, and most of Terra AD is supposed to be a hothouse jungle. I believe that's all that's written in the book.
Hmm.
Um, if you were to talk to Jim off script, he would probably say it's ambiguous of whether it was the far future or the far past, which is interesting. But you also have things in there in the books like Mars shows up in the book. So if you've got Mars, is that like our Mars or somebody else's Mars? So it could be anywhere you want it to be. But as written, it's Terra AD.
100%. You are 100% right. And I do have a handout from Jim. I've been talking to Jim, and I showed him last week's questions as well. And he's graciously offered to give us kind of input every week on the questions that we had from the previous week. So I have an answer for him on this one, and it's about his specific playtest group. Elaine, if you could bring up handout X1, please. This is a quote from Jim. He says, "In my own playtest group, I was more specific. My campaign took place on Earth 10,000 years after an advanced 30th century Vancian super science society fell. My reasonings was that these guys would make stuff out of super materials and power sources that could last all that time buried in the rock and mud and still function. Later on, I implied that Omega Terra was the far future of Earth. Not sure if I'm saying that
Earth,
right.
Earth.
Aerith.
Stephen, how do you say it?
I always say it Aerith, but I think there's a isn't it when two vowels go a walk in the first one, so it would be eighth if you were to follow that grammar rule.
Eighth, Arth, something like
I would
that.
never call it that.
Earth.
I could see if you called it that.
He says Terra AD was the far future of Earth, the pre-RPG setting for the old Dungeon Crawl Classics line. So there's a little bit tidbit for you guys.
If I could go off script for a second, this is the kind of stuff that I get wrapped around the axle on. Not the ankle, I get wrapped around the ankle as well. When I wrote Omnivery of Eden, I did come up with a timeline. And so I said, if you were assuming that it was today's Earth and this happened and then this happened and then this happened. So in the back of that adventure, if you want a more Earth-based Earth for Terra AD, there is that timeline available for you to check out in the back of that adventure.
And how far did your timeline go? Can we get a hint, or do you want him to have to?
I can look it up here in the background, but I think it was basically
I think it was
basically the disaster happened like 1500 years after now, and then the mutant thing was 6,000 years after that. But I can look it up.
Yeah, I was remembering it was like 8, maybe 9,000 years from modern day, something. So along the same lines.
Find it.
That's all right. And you are more than welcome to go off script anytime you would like to. Our third question was, where did all the occupations go? There were 100, and now we only have 2, a hunter or a gatherer. Now, I do have another comment from Jim. Do you want to go before Jim or after Jim?
I will go before Jim. I'm going to go, and hopefully this is not when Jim here's how I will answer this diplomatically. In the early draft of MCC that I played from Jim, 0 level characters weren't there, and there was some discussion about that, and I'm like, I really think that's an important concept, and they eventually do make it in there. But I think just as part of that, how he evolved the game and how you go from a 0 level, and I think it maybe just be one of those things that you always want to be advancing the story. So maybe he didn't feel it was advancing the story. There was enough in the mutations and the occupations that it just didn't feel like he needed to put it in there. That's how I would answer it. I don't know how Jim would answer it.
All right, well, we have Jim's answer.
Yeah,
Elaine, if you could bring up handout X2 for us. Jim says, this was me trying to be clever, and I would probably do it differently today. In a true Neolithic culture, there are only those 2 professions. And for game balance, I added in the beginning equipment table for level 0 characters. In hindsight, I don't think the joke quite landed, and a lot of players got confused by this. I could have just as easily made a D100 table of endless Neolithic professions like mudslinger, gourd carver, hide tanner, etc. And I mean, as soon as I read this, I'm like, Jim, make me the list. Make me the D100 list, I'm thinking in my head.
So that is what your third-party community is for. That is what they're really good at. In fact, one of my favorite third-party things is alternate occupations. It's still available out there as a PDF. I would encourage any of you aspiring authors that want to get into the Gong Farmer's Almanac to make Matt's list, or Great Matt's list for him.
And there's some out there, right, Stefan?
Oh yeah, last time we mentioned using Frozen in Time. They've got there's a mini, I think it's like a D30 instead of a D100 or something along those lines.
Oh, Bishop had one too. Maybe,
yeah, he did like the gift of like Og and Sus or something like. That's not quite the title, but it's close.
Yeah.
So he's got a thing in there as well. So yeah, and there's some plenty of alternate ones. You go look at Purple Sorcerer, and you'll be like, where the heck did this come from? I don't even know where this came. Who came up with this? Oh, well, I got an answer on one. It was Harley Stroh wanted it for like a tournament that was never published, and that's where this weird occupation table comes from. So,
our last question for Tim was, how do you do an artifact check? So, Steven, how do you do an artifact check in your game?
So I will tell you, I've got my book right here, and artifact check is one of the ones that has to be bookmarked because it is always one of those things I have to go back and do the math. So I do artifact. So here's what I do. I do artifact checks rules as written, as you will, with the D20 plus the int modifier plus whatever your artifact check bonus is minus a complexity modifier. And that's a lot of math. So what's interesting about that, and if I could, are we on air now? Can I wax poetic?
Oh, absolutely.
The thing about doing an artifact check, and I've got this Excel spreadsheet that I came up with, like, okay, so what's the standard int modifier and, standard roll percentiles and blah, blah, blah. So first and second level, to do anything interesting with table 7.1, which it tells you to go do something on once you've done the artifact check. Now, I know there's a lot of caveats in there. You could get an assist and all that. But to get anything interesting typically requires a 17 or higher, or like an 18 or higher. You have to roll an 18 or higher before you get into that. So what I like to do in the adventures I publish is I actually, if it's an interesting artifact, I come up with my own artifact result check table just to see, and I lower the things and I make more interesting or more game interesting
Mm-hmm.
results. So like, okay, so if you roll a 0, this is this horrible thing that happens which mutates you. If you roll a little bit less than 0, or I mean higher than 0, then it affects your party. But I think what I would do for judges, my guidance to judges would be, is try to make the like in DCC, in typical DCC, a 12 or better typically represents success. So you want to roll a 12 or better to get success. And I would just like play with the artifact result table with whatever you're dealing with.
Yeah,
It's a long-winded answer, and I apologize.
no. Do not apologize at all, because
Okay.
that's a great thing. And we were going to talk a little bit more, probably in a future episode, about the tech level. And without a certain intelligence, by rules as written, you're not even allowed to make an artifact check if the tech level is too high. And I'm going to just mention this now, Stefan, because I saw it in the forums and I thought it was such a good idea. But let's say you had a cleric that was a tech level of 3, and you had an artifact that was a tech level of 5. Still let them try the artifact check, but lower it down the dice chain by two
That
two
was what
steps.
Snyderman was saying last time.
Did he say
It wasn't
that?
in the forums. Yeah, that was what Tim was saying.
Well, listen, I saw it in the forums like from 2017. I saw it
Oh,
reiterated, so
wow.
maybe Snyder stole it from the forum.
I was
I
having
mean,
emails with Mr. Snyderman not too long ago, and I believe I checked this in the book. I believe there's nothing in the book where the tech level is less than like a 3 or 4. So
Yeah.
there is no tech level 1 or 2 in there. So in some projects I'm working on, I drop the tech level on some really mundane items as well.
yeah, that'd be great. Like your electric
Yeah.
toothbrush.
Yeah, exactly.
Stapler, tech level 1.
It's literally, with the spoiler alert, it's literally a T-shirt. Like, what does it take to put on a T-shirt?
All right, well, let's get into our new questions for this week. I'm sure the audience out there wants some new answers. We're going to dive into the Sentinel, since that's the first kind of class we come to in the book. So, Stefan, do you want to
Absolutely.
hit it
Yeah,
off?
I'm ready for these. So we start with just how does the Sentinels artifact die work?
Oh, when I'm answering this,
Oh yeah, we let you go first.
Yeah. You go. You're the guest of honor.
I'm the guest of honor. Okay, so I did actually a little bit of homework. So the thing about the Sentinel is the Sentinel does not have a deed die. So this is like one of your differences between DCC and MCC. And normally
Mm-hmm.
the deed die is one of my favorite things. So I think this is the Sentinel's way to show their their acumen. So as I understand it, right? If the Sentinel is using an artifact weapon, they include this die, this artifact die, as part of their attack roll. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's what gives them the buff on being able to use these weapons of the ancients because of their possession. So as the levels advance, they get this artifact die, and it gets rolled when they're using the right weapon. So that's how I would answer that.
All right.
I
Well,
think
I don't know
you're
if that's right, but that's how I would.
you're at least halfway right.
Okay, that's good news.
I think. Uh, it's uh, it's for weapons and armor because they're going to be, that force field, that plasteel mesh, whatever is going to be handy. They've got this brain programmed with violence, I guess. Um, but it's good for attacks and it's good for artifact checks. So figuring out how to use it and then also using it.
So how
But
would you
yeah,
do
you're
that with armor? How does that die work with armor?
just when you're figuring out how to use it.
Oh, so just like as
Yeah,
you
the artifact check.
Okay, gotcha.
Well,
Yeah,
let's take a look here, Elena. If you can bring up handout 1A for us for the viewers out there, on page 26 in the book, it says each level Sentinels add an extra artifact die to the artifact checks when examining artifact weapons and armor. And then if you could also bring up handout 1B for us, it says Sentinels also add this artifact die to their attack rolls when using the artifact weapon. And Stefan, in your game, the Technomancer of Candy Mountain, we even had that question come up because
We
who was
did.
playing the Sentinel? They didn't know if they should add it to their damage dice.
Nick was playing the Sentinel, I believe, and yeah, and we were trying to figure out, wait, is this just for the attack roll? Does this also get applied to the damage die? How close? We don't get a mighty deed, but how close is this to the warrior's mighty deed? And it's so artifact checks and attack rolls.
And so that got me thinking, they're comparable, but they're different. And so what makes them not get a D die? Well, because all the weapons and equipment they're using are mechanical. There's no really self ability in there that they would be able to put their skill or flair into, I guess, is what I came up with. Steven, what do you think?
I think the D die is one of the most fabulous bits of DCC. And so if I were to extend classes if I were ever to do a zine, if I were a third party publisher doing zines, I would figure out a way to have a class in there because it's your swashbucklery as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there should be a guy who's very or a person who's very adept with weapons, which the Sentinel is, and I think there is room to have a D die on a different class. That's how I would say that. And maybe if you've done it, if you've said that an artifact die is available for Sentinels, then maybe like a barbarian class, it has to be a mundane sort of attack where the D die takes effect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it doesn't get applied to damage because a lot of those artifacts already do crazy damage.
That's true.
Yeah.
Your force baton does 2d8. Do you really need another d3? I mean, no one's going to say no to that, but you don't need it. It's
Well, Elena, if you could bring up handout 1C for us, this is kind of the experience table in the book, and it shows us the artifact bonus die with weapons and armor, and even clarifies it on there. It goes through the dice chain 3, 4, 5, D6, D7, D8, D10, D12, all the way to D16. And then if you could bring up handout 1D for us, please, Elena. This is your melee and armor weapons and pistols. So pistols, rifles, grenades. Maybe the grenades I could see a deed die, but melee weapons, I think you could definitely do a deed for that because you're doing the melee attack, the force baton, the plasma sword, the zapper glove, all those things you could get fancy with and do a little showmanship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I agree. Oh, go ahead, Steven. Sorry.
No, I'm not saying anything. Yep. Just going, yeah.
Well, yeah, that was basically what I was gonna say. Yeah, add some showmanship. Yeah, easy little house rule for those as one. But rules is written now.
Yeah, rules is written no. We'll have to see what Jim says of that. I'm curious to see why the D die was excluded. I mean, you want to make it your own. So, Stephen, when you're creating a module, is there when you're creating a module, do you specifically stay away from things you previously wrote to make it a distinct piece of its own?
I don't know if I stay away from things. I will definitely adapt. I mean, like, so there are certain. So a simple example in DCC, when writing a DCC adventure, I always want to put in something where it's like, and if you have this background occupation of blah blah or blah, you get a bonus, right? Because I think it's a fun mechanic. And like I mentioned when I write MCC adventures, I try to write custom artifact tables, and so I'm sorry, artifact check results. So they will be different and they will be unique each time I write it, but I go back to themes, if you will.
Nice. All right. Well, so now we give an official answer. So how does a Sentinel's artifact die work? And I'm not sure if we ever talked about the mechanic. But whenever a Sentinel is making an artifact check on a new weapon or armor that they found, and this is the regular artifact check, not the combat artifact check, the 3-turn, 30-minute artifact check, they will get to roll this dice and add it to the result of that roll. Stefan, what is your answer on that? Well, let's talk about that for a minute. Would they be able to use that in a combat artifact check?
I'd
It's in a
allow it. I'd allow it as like a special class ability.
right.
So
Well, give us your official answer, and then we'll ask Steven if he would allow it.
well, the official answer for this question: how does the Sentinels artifact die work? They are doing their artifact check as normal. Watch the last episode. I'm not going to go through the whole thing again. And then they get to add their variable die here: D3 level 1, D4 level 2, etc. If it's weapon or armor, they get to do that for the artifact check, and they get to do that for attack. So that's just with weapons. And they add
That's
it to
right.
their attack roll, not damage.
That is correct. Good clarification. So, Steven, what is your final answer on the subject? And as a side note, a side question, would you allow it on a combat artifact check?
So, so first of all, I probably should have opened with this, that I play rules pretty loose at the table. So I am probably one of the worst guests to have on as rules as written.
That means you're one of
Um,
the best guests, because then we
okay,
get a
well,
different perspective.
I love
Yeah.
that. So honestly, there will be so would I allow it at the table? So having done my homework for this episode, I would say no. Um, but again, I'm going to go off on tangents. I always want my players to play the kind of game they want to play. So if I'm at a table and my character, my player, I should say, says, "Hey, do I get a bonus because I'm blah?" I'm almost always going to say yes, because I want players at the table to have fun. And if a player wants to, bring bonuses from their character sheet or embellish the action because of things in their character sheet, I always want to promote that. So I would say no if asked, but if a player asks me if they can introduce it, I'm going to say yes.
All right, there you go. So, what's your official answer on how does the artifact die work?
The artifact die.
Yep.
Oh, so with the Sentinels. So basically,
Mhm.
again, so my official answer would be uh, adding it to the 2-hit rolls as part of their Sentinel attacks.
All right, Stefan, what's the
Well,
next question we got?
when using an artifact, yeah.
All right. Gotcha. But yeah, our next question is: do Sentinels have an increased crit range to melee attacks? And I think this question comes from the fact that they are pretty similar to Warriors, or at least they're the most similar. And Warriors get that in DCC, but do Sentinels?
What do you think,
Steven,
Steven?
guest of
They do
honor.
not. They
All
do
right.
not. Yeah, that's a no.
I,
Um,
it's kind of an easy question to answer. But their classes do kind of represent. The Plantian is like the halfling; they can give out luck and stuff like that. The Sentinel's like the warrior. So there are similarities, but there's definitely distinctions that separate the two and make them two individual beings. And so, increased crit range, I thought would have been great for the Sentinel because it's such an easy thing to add in there, and it makes it a little unique.
okay, so I am Joseph Goodman hits the lottery and he goes off and he leaves me the company. And so I come to you and I say, make a character for MCC that is the brawny character type. And do you, as a game designer, basically go ability bullet by bullet? This is what, so warriors have a D die, they have a crit range, and they've got this. Do you just do a transport of that, or do you like start with that and kind of mix it up a little bit?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we would need to change it to something else.
That's right. So, and I
Mhm.
think that's kind of what Jim has done, right? You don't want to do it's
Yeah.
like halflings had 2 hands and luck, and therefore plant should have 2 hands and luck. You want to do it, it's like you want it familiar because you know where people are coming from, but you want to mix it up a little bit so it could be its own game. So that is where art meets science or art meets game design, I think, where as a game designer, you want to introduce new concepts um, to things that are familiar. This is where I think the fleeting luck rule that Michael Curtis introduced for Lankmar is brilliant because it's new, but it's so familiar and you kind of do it. So I think that's the artifact die is that with Sentinels.
All right, Stefan, what do you think? Well, let's look at handout 2A before you answer that, Stefan. On page 26, talking about the Sentinel, it says highly skilled in all native and mundane weaponry. So they're skilled in every kind of mundane weaponry. Sentinels also have the martial mindset and penchant for strategy and tactics that give them an advantage whenever mastering and using the technological weapons and armor from the Ancient Ones. So maybe everything we need is right there. Maybe it's some kind of strategy and tactics ability. What do you think, Stefan?
Well, I think that's where they're going to roll a d20, where other classes might roll a d10, because the strategy and tactics is going to be untrained for them. But clearly, it's in the Sentinels' wheelhouse. But they don't get an increased crit range. If you want that, go find an artifact, or go find like some some kind of viro sheath that you can put your normal sword in that makes it have an increased crit range for a little bit of time. Like same with the you don't have a D die, go find some like crazy old boxing gloves or something that will give you a D die when you're using that.
Or
Have
if
it.
you're 100%
Yeah,
compatible, bring a warrior. Don't call him a sentinel.
absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, I think this one's a pretty easy one to answer. Stefan, why don't you give us your official answer? Do Sentinels have an increased crit range, or do any other characters have an increased crit range to melee attacks?
Not unless, as Steven said, not unless you're bringing a warrior over. Get out of here.
Yeah. I'm going to have to agree with you. Rules is written. No, they do not. There are no increased crit ranges unless you find something, perhaps a artifact of the ancient, like some kind of homing mechanisms, some homing goggles, and then I might make your crit range from like 15 to 20. Steven, what's your final answer on that one?
Yeah, I think so. I think your idea there is the perfect one, which is if you are missing a. So, short answer, no, you don't get it. But that is a great opportunity to bring in an artifact, kind of like those vacuum cleaners that will like power themselves along. You could have some sort of artifact that gives you a little bit of artificial inertia and give you some increased crit range. I think that's a great way to handle that.
Steven, when you're writing modules and adventures and just material in general, um, are you always trying to think of, it always seems like when I'm creating stuff, like it's so hard to get an original idea and create some kind of artifact that's never been out there, because like in our world we have everything out there. But are you always trying to figure out something like a woodly dooler or something, some kind of new item?
So I
Stefan, I got that name because you just made me play Candy Mountain, so I've got like all these candy names in my head.
All right. I was like, Woodley Dueler? What?
Sorry, Steven, go ahead.
no. Well, that was first. Was that question for me? Because now I'm confused who the
Yeah,
question was for.
it was for you. It was for you. I was my mind
Okay.
is tainted by the Willy Wonka. There was a Wilder silly names in there, and that's all I could
I'm
come up with.
I'm always looking for fun artifacts that you can introduce, right? So I think part of y- the zeitgeist, if you will, of MCC is to find fun things that the characters can interact with and potentially blow themselves up with it if they start rolling low on that artifact check. So, as an example, one of the things I brought up or one of the artifacts I did in Children of the Fallen Sun was this way. It was basically like a food dehydrator, except it worked on humans. And if you were injured, you could shoot yourself with it. It would turn you into a piece of jerky so that you could be rehydrated later. So that's got a very real world equivalent, but then you just kind of mess with it. So, long story short, adapt things that are in the real world. Like again, those vacuum cleaners could do some damage if you've got a self powering
Mhm.
vacuum cleaner. And just like, is this going to be fun at the table? Just like, and then I would say something that John Marr taught me, which is, we used to talk a lot, was just make it weirder. When you think it's weird enough, then just try to make it a little bit weirder if you can.
Those are some like Shark Tank entrepreneurial words right
That's
there.
right.
The human dehydrator. I'm gonna look for that. All
Yeah.
right. So our next question is written communication less important than MCC if everyone begins illiterate? So everyone in MCC begins illiterate, and it was really interesting when I started researching this question. But Steven, what do you think?
So I could get really long-winded on this one. So basically, in all three of my adventures, in all three of the adventures I've written thus far, I've grappled with written communication and how it should be handled. And I went back to all three and I handle it differently in each one. So in Fallen Sun, I basically say it's going to require a DC 13 or better invoke patron AI to understand the
Hmm.
written language. In Omnivary, I made it based on intelligence and luck to maybe understand it. And for other adventure that is not disclosed, there's like another way that it happens. Um,
I'm sure you
so
have to like befriend a very literate beaver man or something.
there's always a beaver man in there somewhere.
Always.
Um, yes, there is. So uh, I think I don't know if it's important, but I think it becomes interesting in gameplay. And the other thing I would say is understanding what is being written. Uh, uh, is it is it instrumental germane to the game that you're playing? So, for example, you never want to like block off secret doors so that like you want multiple
Mhm.
entrances to an area so that people can't not get to it. So if it's impossible to understand the language and that's like critical for the gameplay, then you need to give the players lots of ways to figure out how to do that.
Stefan, what do you think? Well, let's bring up handout 3A, please, Elena. Page 18. I really didn't realize this whenever I've been playing MCC. I read through the beginning chapters. I kind of skipped through all the mutations and stuff unless I needed them directly. I got to some meaty stuff in the back. But, I haven't read it word for word every cover to cover. But I didn't even realize I hadn't really absorbed that they really don't know how to read at all. And I think once I started researching this and got the feel of the nuance of it, I was like, man, this is kind of cool because it just gives a whole different dynamic to your role playing. But on page 18, it says all sentient characters know the verbal form of Newspeak, a mongrel descendant of the last universal language spoken by the Ancient Ones. Beginning characters are otherwise illiterate and have no written language. What do you think, Stefan?
I mean, they can't read, that's for sure. You can kind of expect that eventually, level one, level two, depending on what the game is like, what or in a one shot, what you could assume that some characters might be able to kind of sight read to some extent. That red exit sign is like the same in like every building across America, basically. So, if that's kind of the theoretical region, some far flung version of that, they might eventually go, oh, okay, that sign means I'll either get to go outside really soon or it's going to be blocked with rubble. But they might be able to get a few things like that. Just like they're eventually going to figure out, often there's like a little, if I find the right kind of plastic thingy and, the right plastic rectangle and put it up to that little sign next to the door that won't open, it might open, or I have to break the door down. Like they're going to figure a few things out, but it's just going to be trial and error. It doesn't mean they can read, but they'll create these associations.
All right. The handout 3B, if we could bring that up, Elena, even though, so all the words in written communication they're ever going to speak is from the ancient ones, basically. And so
Mhm.
everything that we read would be on everything. But the mutants and the zero levels, pure strain humans, plantians, manimals, they do use a lot of verbal communication, which I didn't really realize either until I reread it and researched it. But on page 18, for each point of intelligence modifier, characters know one additional language associated with their archaic alignment. So if they have an increase in intelligence mod, they get another language. These additional languages are given at 0 level. So they have them as a 0 level. Manimals and plantians automatically know their dialect languages of their general genotype as well. So you may know how to speak oak tree or bear. And then, Elaine, if you can bring up handout 3C, upon advancing to first level, a character may learn additional languages. Rovers get the security access language. Mutants, manimals, plantians, and other pure strain humans get a free language. That is how I read that, Stefan. Mutants, manimals, plantians, and other pure strain humans learn one additional language. And then shamans learn one additional language per point of intelligence modifier. Is that how you guys read that too? Is that they get a free bonus language just for getting first level?
That's how I read it. Yeah, you can, I don't know, say something like, "Oh, there's a lot of bear manimals in this region." So, always hanging out with the cubs from around the corner, learned how to speak bear.
All right, Steven, what do you think?
So I think this is another opportunity similar to occupations that there could be an appendix L in there of languages that you could throw in there. So if you're going to say that people can speak languages, and there was a couple of hints in there. Um, I think it's a great opportunity for a third party publisher to say these are the different dialects and languages of Terra AD that you might get in there. You do have monsters, right? So the monsters probably have like reptilian or something like that, or you've got the manimal subtypes and whatnot.
Yeah,
I
I
think the
think that
last
would
thing I
be
would say
great.
on this to augment my previous answer is I think shaman, just based on their class abilities, would have a bonus to both understanding the ancient Terran language as well as any written form of that.
Yeah.
So I think that would be a good class differentiator for gameplay.
And there are some like AIs where in the Invoke AI, I think Tetraplex is one. I had a guy be a cleric at Tetraplex in a previous campaign, where some of the Invoke patron souls are just you're gonna know the language of the ancients for an hour or something like that. So there's ways to do reading in the game without having to make up new rules. You just or you get those goggles.
Exactly.
Well, and this is how Jim made it. So if we bring up handout 3D, page 15, it says characters with an intelligence of 7 or less can speak only Newspeak. So they don't know any other languages. They're still illiterate. So he definitely wanted there to be a language barrier. He wanted there to be some kind of barrier where you don't understand what all these scribbles are on all the buildings. Our last handout is going to be handout 3E. Elena, if you could bring that up. And this kind of speaks to what Steven said about the shamans. On page 28, it says shamans specialize in ancient lore and knowledge. That's their specialty, particularly focusing upon legend and myth associated with those demigod servants of the ancient ones, artificial intelligences. Even without the benefit of a written language, shamans pass along knowledge to each other, an oral tradition of arcane knowledge relating to these not so lost technological beings. So this talks about their AIs and how they're knowing what an AI is and how they're incorporating that following with the AI, speaking with it, interacting with it. What do you think? I mean, how intentional do you guys play it? I can't say that when I've played MCC, I've really paid attention to that lack of being able to read anything.
Well, like I said, I've written like in all three of the things I've written, I have a understanding the language of the ancients in there, just for judges to use it, and of course you can use it or not use it. I think it's a great part of the exploration of a game, right? Because you go into a new area and the robots are either talking to you or something's written on the wall and you have to determine what that is. So you got to, give the judge a
Mm,
little bit of something to help them. I mean, you buy a module because you don't want to do the prep work. You don't want to have to do the
Right.
homework. You want the DM or the publisher to have done that for you. So it only takes about a couple of sentences to give judges some hints on and if your characters are struggling with that, have them either do an invoke patron or do one of these spells or something like that.
yep.
But yeah,
And yeah, you said also like you can have a robot speak to them. It can be a hologram. It can be why don't we have more murals? I'm pretty sure these Neolithic folks are going to have just as many murals and cave paintings as we often see be handouts in Dungeon Crawl Classics. So not everything should be communicated through text or even the written language. Uh, I mean, they don't know how to read. Everyone gripes about that with like barbarians and D&D, but it's actually not even a big deal. Not at all.
Stefan, well, you've created some MCC content as well. Is there
Yeah.
any insight in there for any self-destruct buttons that you've put in the in your modules, like do not push? Like how
I
are
mean, if you just tell the players it's a big red button, they're going to be afraid of it, but they're going to want to push it anyway.
Yeah.
I wrote a funnel. It's a part of my ongoing Kickstarter where I have some fun nonsense with like genetic memories and kind of make it so you can have an excuse to have like programmed knowledge and have those people know how to read a little bit at least. So if there's so many ways that if you really need the written word, you can go ahead and do it.
All right, well, let's give our final answers. Is written communication less important than MCC if everyone starts out illiterate? My answer is going to be that it's more important. It adds another depth of a layer to the game, a depth of role playing that you can interact with, an innate obstacle that's all around you that you can't read these words on everything. Like, I don't know that this bottle says poison, but I do see the little crossbones with the skull face. So it's all visual, and I'm going to start doing that whenever I run MCC more. I'm going to try to be a lot more visual and not take advantage of what Jim has given me without there being any literacy within the world. Stefan, what's your final answer?
Uh, yeah, I'll say being literate is less important, but yeah, to your point, in some ways, being illiterate is more important because it does have that flavor. I never thought about it that way, but yeah, I agree with you on that.
All right, Steven, you get the final word. What's your final word on this subject?
I think my final word on this would be think about how much language has changed in between like Shakespeare's time, the Gettysburg Address, and how we write a letter today. I mean, half my kids' communications are in emojis. We have no idea what written communication is going to look like in 600 years, and it might just all be in colors as far as we know. So,
Yeah, it's just happy button. Yeah, it's all
yeah,
it's all emoji based. It's
right.
5,000 years. It's like all the people from Wally. It's all the folks on
That's
that
right,
spaceship.
exactly. In
They
our
don't know how
little
to read.
space lounges, yeah. So, um, I think do what's fun for your game. You always want to give players fun things to do. So if it's important to make it fun at your game table, then do it.
All right, Stefan, what is our fourth question for this evening?
Our fourth question is a good one. How do you make a combat artifact check? Stephen
All right.
I've
Newton.
I've never done a combat artifact check. I do know the rules, but I've never had to do one. So I could researching this last night, and this kind of gets back to our original answer. Um, it's just a straight D20. It removes
Mhm.
all modifiers and whatnot. So that's how I interpret the rules as written. I've never had to do that in gameplay.
Yeah, and you got to spend a luck point to just roll that straight
Right.
d20.
That's true. That's true. Yep. And as I mentioned earlier, it's probably going to go poorly, right? Because see the aforementioned Excel file, that's like you have to roll 17, 18, 19, and that's with intelligence bonuses and artifact check
Hmm.
bonuses. It's probably going to go poorly for you unless you burn a bunch of luck.
Yeah, because it's like DC 12, but you have to think about the complexity modifier factoring into that. That still
Right.
is a component. DC 12. So, and there's nothing in the core rulebook that's less than a 3. So really you need a roll of 15 on a die to be able to use an item one time, is I think what the 12 amounts
Yeah.
to.
At first or second level. That's right. That's right.
Well, Elena, if you could bring up handout 4A for us, this is going to go over first our artifact check that we discussed last session. On page 167, it tells us a d20 plus your intelligence mod plus your class artifact check bonus minus the artifact's CO, or complexity modifier, CM. And on page 168, then it talks about the combat artifact check. In order to make a combat artifact check, they're deep in the midst of combat. You chop off the robot's arm, and it's got some kind of attachment, pointy attachment on it that he was shooting a freeze blast out of, and you want to try to use it. You immediately must burn a point of luck. This earns the character a one-time combat artifact check that only takes 1 round to execute, 10 seconds, as opposed to 3 turns, a standard artifact check normally requires, and to which no normal bonuses apply except further luck expenditures. Example, a combat artifact check is a straight roll that does not include any artifact check bonuses from genotype, level, or ability modifiers. So let's examine this real quick and see if our Sentinels artifact check dice would apply. First, it says no normal bonuses apply except further luck expenditures. Would that be a normal bonus, that artifact die? What do you guys think?
I guess that would be a normal bonus.
Yeah, because a normal bonus is either going to be it's your class abilities, right? It's that table
Mhm.
in each class, and so that is part of the Sentinel class. Although to
Would it,
me, this is a great opportunity where a Sentinel should be differentiated versus another class.
would it be that would a Sentinel's artifact die be a normal bonus or a specialized bonus? Because the normal bonus, like all pure strain humans, get a normal artifact check bonus. So could we consider that artifact die a special exclusive bonus?
I
But
would.
then
That's true.
let's go down to the bottom then. It says check bonuses from genotype. So that would be manimal, plantium, different types. So that wouldn't apply. Level wouldn't apply. Or ability modifiers. So that would be intelligence, strength. So that wouldn't apply either. So the only thing that's holding us back from using the artifact die is that normal bonuses. So if we call it a special bonus, what do you guys think?
Like I said, I would do it at my table. I would allow the Sentinel to use it at my table.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Well, yeah, you got to email Jim about that one.
I will see what Jim says, but
Yeah.
I want to go back
It-
to the description. It says they're specialized in weapons and armor. So
yeah,
wouldn't that really apply in the midst and throes of combat? They're
and
tacticians.
it does say bonuses from genotype, level, or ability modifier. Now it's IE before that, so it's not necessarily all encompassing, but it's a class bonus, but it is related to level.
So with me, like the constitutionalist in me says, look, if you're including genotype, that means you're including a class. So that to
Yeah,
me is subtext for a class bonus.
That's
I
true.
I think rules as written is no, but might be convinced to ignore that.
Well, we'll see what Jim says next week or 2 weeks from now. Handout 4B though has that table that Steven was talking about, the artifact check table, table 7-1. And so, 12, you got to get a 12. Otherwise, the other three, the artifact is going to break. And then once we get into that 17 to 19 range, that's your sweet spot.
Mhm.
And the artifact activates and operates, and you basically understand how to use it at that point.
Now we do, oh no, my cat is trying to pull my cord on my headset.
I know.
He almost unplugged me.
Oh, good.
Um, we do have the Darwinian luck. Like, it's only the mutant and the manimal that don't get any kind of luck recovery in Mutant Crawl Classics. So, you're restricted to the luck expenditure, but you're gonna get that luck back. A Sentinel is gonna recover 1 luck a day.
So why do you think there is so let's talk about this, Stephen. When you do a regular artifact check in your modules and adventures, 30 minutes. It takes 30 minutes. Are you rolling unless they're like bunkered down in a city or whatever, a town, are you rolling a random encounter?
Uh, Not usually. I uh, the theme of MCC adventures for me is I typically keep the random encounters. Like they usually start like several of the adventures I've played or run. You have to go through the desert waste to get to where you're going. So when you're going through the desert waste, that's when I roll. Um, that's when I roll random encounters. But once you're in the place, wherever the place happens to be, at least in the adventures I've written, there's not a lot of random monsters. Now, if I was converting Barrier Peaks to MCC, there's stuff running around in that place the whole time, so I probably would in that adventure. But it's just based on what I've run and written. Usually, things are pretty still, and it's more like a tomb
Mm-hmm.
that you're going through than a busy ant hive. except for Hive of the Overmind, which is a busy overmind type.
All right, so is there really any benefit when you're in the throes of combat? Stefan, do you see any? I mean, everybody does it, but just because we like to see if we're going to blow up or blow the creature's face completely off.
Yeah.
But mechanically, value wise, is there really a bonus if it's only a straight D20 roll to do that
Not
combat
unless you
artifact?
not unless you got the luck to spend. That's because you got to get a 15 or higher for unless you're counting on it going horribly and taking the thing out with yourself. That's always a possibility. But yeah, in all likelihood, you got to have that luck to spend. But your luck's likely going to recover, so it's not so bad.
All right. Well, one thing that I did find from the forums, if we could bring up handout 4C, Elena, and this is kind of a tangent of my own, but everybody, whenever we play MCC, everybody wants to be the manimal, the plant, the mutant, because they have all these cool mutations, and the pure strain humans get overlooked quite a bit. But that's because their specification, their way to shine is usually through the artifacts. And one reason, and another thing that I really hadn't kind of incorporated in play, is Dave the Lost here on November 25th, 2016 says one advantage of the pure strain humans is that all the equipment is going to be designed for them. Medications are supposed to be working for them instead of being poison. The power armor, radiation suits, goggles will all fit. Tools are made for hands, not claws or tentacles. And so I hadn't really thought about that either. That your Plantian is trying to put on a gas mask, but you got bark all over your face, guy. I need you to shave that bark off, and then maybe I'll allow it.
It's a great point. Great point.
Very good point.
So to finish up this, yeah, that was a little side tangent there. We'll have to get into that question down the road. To finish up this one right here, though, if we bring up handout 4D, Elena, page 262. Says coming from an era of magic use and at least infrequent literacy, DCC RPG characters will have a slight advantage over the Neolithic tribesmen and mutants of MCC RPG in attempting to master the technology of the Ancient Ones, particularly wizards. And I'm not sure why I didn't put this with 3. Maybe it's the next table, because handout 4E shows if you bring our DCC character to MCC, this would be their artifact check bonuses. So I think that's why I relate it to that. And the wizard, if you look at the wizard and the elf, because of their arcane knowledge, they're getting a +6 artifact check bonus at first and second level. Steven, what do you think about that?
I don't know, man. I know it's written all over the rule book. I never associated the gameplay in my mind doesn't really associate MCC with Neolithic caveman style intelligence. I just my MCC games, they just feel like a healer or a shaman feels smarter than that. So I think that's where I struggle with now obviously it's an assertion from the author of the game, so who might argue what he's saying there, but they feel smarter to me. I have a little bit more love for my MCC characters. I give them a little bit more ability to interact with their environment. They've been interacting with their environment. Their whole raison d'etre of these seekers is to go out and find technology, so it is core to their world. So it just, these are not people that have not invented fire yet.
Yeah, and what's the period after Neolithic? Is it Paleolithic or
I don't know.
I don't know either.
It's a million years. Yeah, Paleo man.
Stefan, what are your thoughts on the conversion of bringing the DCC characters over and that wizard, starting out at 6, 8, 10, 12, 14?
I think it's crazy. When I had that happen in my campaign, I literally halved all of the bonuses from there because I was going, why is this cleric getting a +6? They came over at 3rd level to MCC, and I was going, +6 doesn't like. Why does he know how to use a ray gun so well? Why does he know how to use a computer so well? That doesn't make any sense. So I cut all those in half.
Maybe it's that arcane knowledge, that magic, that phlogiston that we cannot understand. But we'll see. We'll see if Jim has any comment on that. But let's give our final answers because we're about running out of time here. How do you make a combat artifact check, Stefan? What is your final answer?
Spend a point of luck, roll a d20, and you're probably going to have to use a lot more luck after that because you get no bonuses.
My answer: spend a point of luck, roll a d20. That is it. It is the straight d20. But I will add that you can get that Plantian to burn 2 for 1 for you. Steven, what is your final answer on the subject?
I've never had to do it, but if I did, I would let the Sentinel get his die now that I've done this research with you gentlemen today.
All right. Well, we want to thank you for being a guest. You were an outstanding guest to have on. We really appreciated you coming on. Is there anything that you can tell us that you're working on? All the guests come on here and they tell us a little secret of what they're working on. If you watched any past episodes,
I would say that there is stuff that I have worked on, and I really can't say much more than that. But I do have a request for you guys.
Yes.
Because this is the question I thought I was going to ask because I struggled with it. For your next week's episode, please ask people how to do an AI recognition check with different types of robots.
Okay, we will definitely have that in there.
We'll do it.
Yeah.
All right.
So I actually had to look at some of the other adventures, say like, how the hell do they do this? So yeah.
All right.
We'll do it. Different types of robots, and we'll talk about the manimals and the Plantians and all that.
Ones and like cleaning robots get low ones, so it's like that. I think your viewers want to know.
All right.
But thank you so much for having me on. Totally appreciate it.
We appreciate you coming. You got anything else you want to say before we get off the air? Any last comments?
No. Thanks everybody for watching. I love the community. I love what you guys are doing for the community. So yeah, keep on running. I'm glad to see that MCC is getting a little bit more love. I know Tim has written several adventures over the last few months, so I'm looking forward to diving into some of those games.
All right. Before we go to you, Stefan, and before I forget, the Road Crew Rally is tonight. So at 8 o'clock, there will be a Road Crew Rally here with Uncle Brendan. After that, Bob and Jen will be on for Sanctum Scorum. So stay tuned. There is a lot of great programming on the Goodman Games Twitch channel tonight. But Stefan, you've got a little Kickstarter going on, don't you?
Yeah, and it's MCC focused. It's called the Technomancer of Candy Mountain. So if you want to have a lot of candy infused nonsense and have some late stage dystopian capitalism that is all revolving around a candy factory in a region that is increasingly more candified, go do that. And there's also a zine with a bunch of different weird stuff in it, like Benisons and Dooms, but MCC style. So it's a good time.
Very nice. And I forgot to get a link for it. I should have done this.
Oh, it's in the chat.
Well,
yes.
Marzio Muscadera also started a Kickstarter to compete with yours, but not a competition. You can back both of them. But Marzio's got a tarot card deck with Gong Farmer crits, I believe. It looks very cool.
It's like 96 cards. It's very cool looking.
Make sure you guys check out those Kickstarters. The Canadian Crippler Marzio has got his Kickstarter going on as well. And we're out. Elena, thank you for being an awesome tech person. And we'll see you guys in 2 weeks' time. So let's get the date here. June 27th, where our guest is going to be Lou Hoffer, crazy Luau Lou, who writes those MCC redone books. He is going to be coming on the guest and talking about some more MCC with us. So we will see you in 2 weeks' time.